Title: The Heir of the Dragon Tongue and the Ancient Covenant. In an age long past, before the world was shaped into its present form, dragons roamed the skies, guardians of ancient wisdom. Their tongues held the secrets of the world, their voices carrying the power to shape reality itself. But with the passing of time, the dragons faded from the world, leaving only whispers of their existence. Yet one remained heir to the dragon's power, bound by a covenant older than time. This is the tale of that heir, and the ancient promise that would change the course of history. In the heart of a forgotten forest, beneath the shadow of towering mountains, there lay a hidden valley. This valley, untouched by time, was the home of the last remaining dragon egg. It had been there for centuries, waiting for the one destined to awaken its power. The people of the nearby village spoke in hushed tones about the dragon's heir, a child born of both human and dragon blood. They said that when the time came, the heir would awaken the ancient covenant, a promise made between the dragons and the first kings of the world. This covenant, if fulfilled, would bring peace and prosperity. If broken, however, the world would fall into chaos. The heir had no name, for they were still an infant, left at the doorstep of a humble home on the edge of the valley. Raised by an elderly couple who had long since forgotten their own names, the child grew strong, their eyes gleaming with the fire of an ancient lineage. The villagers spoke of strange dreams the child had, dreams where a deep voice echoed in their mind, speaking in the forgotten language of the dragons. As the child grew, so did their connection to the dragon's power. At the age of 16, the child stood on the cliffs overlooking the valley, gazing into the storm-filled skies. The wind howled around them, and in that moment, the voices of the dragons stirred within their soul. The air grew thick with energy, the storm seemingly answering the call of the child. The dragon's tongue, a language older than the earth itself, flowed from the child's lips, words unknown to the human tongue, but understood deep within the very fabric of the world. The covenant had been awakened. "Come, O mighty guardians of old," the child whispered, their voice trembling with power. "Hear my call." And from the clouds above, the first of the dragons appeared. It was an ancient beast, its scales shimmering like the stars, its eyes filled with the wisdom of the ages. The dragon descended, its wings stirring the very air, and landed before the child. It bowed its head, as though acknowledging the power that the child now held. "You are the heir," the dragon spoke, its voice a deep rumble, reverberating through the earth. "The covenant is yours to fulfill." The child, standing tall, could feel the weight of the dragon's words. The covenant was not just a promise, it was a binding force, a pact that held the balance of the world in its hands. The dragons had once made a vow to protect the land and its people, but over the centuries, that vow had faded. Now, it was up to the heir to renew it, to restore the balance that had been lost. "I am ready," the child said, their voice steady, though their heart raced with the realization of what was at stake. The dragon nodded, its eyes glowing with approval. "Then the trials must begin. Only when you prove yourself worthy will the covenant be restored." The first trial was one of strength, a test of the child's ability to command the powers of the dragon tongue. The child stood on the cliffs once more, their hands raised to the sky, and called upon the storm. Thunder cracked, and lightning struck the ground at their feet. The child summoned the winds, shaping them into a barrier of protection. But the storm was not their only challenge. From the forest emerged creatures, dark and twisted, sent by those who sought to break the covenant. The child fought with the strength of the dragons, their every movement a dance of fire and fury. With each strike, they invoked the ancient words, their power flowing like a river through their veins. As the trials grew more difficult, the child's strength began to wane. Doubts crept into their mind, whispers from the shadows seeking to undermine their resolve. A vision of the world in flames, consumed by darkness, filled their dreams. Was the covenant truly worth the sacrifice? Was the world doomed to fall into chaos no matter what they did? One night, as the winds howled through the trees, the dragon returned. "You are not alone," the dragon said, its voice gentle but firm. "The covenant is not just your burden to bear. It is shared by all who believe in the balance. You must trust in those who stand beside you." With these words, the child's resolve was renewed. They could no longer fight. Olwundi would need allies, those who still believed in the ancient ways. In the heart of the valley, beneath the shadow of the great mountain, the final trial awaited. The child stood before an army of shadows, creatures that sought to unbind the ancient covenant and plunge the world into eternal darkness. The child called upon the power of the dragons, their voice rising in a mighty roar. The earth trembled, and the skies parted as the dragons returned, their scales glowing with the light of the ancient covenant. The child stood with them, their power now fully awakened, their voice a harmony of the dragon tongue and the ancient promise. Together, they fought, and the darkness was driven back, the creatures scattered by the might of the covenant. The dragons, once again, took their place as the guardians of the world. With the battle won, the child, now a young adult, stood before the dragon, their face serene. "You have done it," the dragon said, its voice filled with pride. "The covenant is restored, and the balance has been saved." The child nodded, their eyes filled with the wisdom of the ages. The world is not just about power, it is about the promise we make to each other. The covenant is not only a bond between dragons and humans, it is a bond between all who seek peace. And so, the heir of the dragon tongue became not only a guardian of the ancient covenant but a beacon of hope for a world forever changed. The winds carried the promise of a new beginning, and the dragons, once again, watched over the world, silent in their wisdom. Though the covenant had been restored, peace did not come easily. Beneath the surface, a new threat began to stir. The darkness that had been banished to the edges of the world was not gone, it had merely retreated into the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And in the quiet corners of the world, rumors began to spread. There were whispers of a figure known only as the Shattered One, a being of immense power who had once been a guardian of the covenant. But long ago, corrupted by greed and ambition, they had broken their oath, seeking to control the power of the dragons for themselves. The world, it seemed, was not as safe as it had appeared. The dragon, sensing the rising threat, called upon the heir once more. "You are not yet finished," it said, its voice carrying the weight of ancient sorrow. "The Shattered One still lives, and they seek to destroy everything we have worked for." The heir felt a heavy burden settle over them. They had only just begun to understand their true purpose, and now they were being thrust into a new battle. One far more dangerous than any they had faced before. The dragon spoke of a place hidden in the depths of the world, where the remnants of the ancient magic still thrived, the only place where the Shattered One could be confronted. The heir would need to venture there, to seek out the answers they needed to defeat the dark force that threatened to undo everything. And so, the heir embarked on a new journey, this time with a group of loyal companions, warriors, scholars, and mages, each with their own skills and knowledge, united by a common cause. They traveled across vast deserts, crossed towering mountain ranges, and ventured deep into forgotten ruins, all the while growing closer as a team. Each person learning the true meaning of trust and sacrifice. The journey was long and perilous, and with each passing day, the heir's connection to the dragon's power grew stronger. They could hear the voices of the dragons more clearly now, whispering ancient secrets, offering guidance, and warning them of the dangers ahead. Yet, despite the strength they had gained, doubt still lingered. Could they truly confront the shattered one and restore balance once more? The day came when they reached the heart of darkness, a massive, swirling vortex of shadow located deep beneath the earth, where the fabric of reality itself seemed to bend and twist. It was here that the shattered one had taken refuge, drawing upon the ancient magic to fuel their dark ambitions. As the group approached the vortex, the air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and strange, eerie sounds echoed through the cavern. The air could feel the power of the dragons within them, but it was not enough. They needed more. They needed the power of the ancient covenant, the power of every soul that had ever believed in the balance. Inside the heart of darkness, they found the shattered one. They were no longer the guardian they had once been, but a twisted, corrupted figure, their body fractured and broken, consumed by the very magic they had once sworn to protect. "You come for me, heir of the dragons?" The shattered one's voice was a raspy whisper, full of contempt. "Do you think you can defeat me? I have become more than a dragon. I am the embodiment of the very force that will tear this world apart." The heir stood tall, their voice steady despite the overwhelming darkness surrounding them. "The covenant is not just a power, it is a promise, a bond that unites us all. You have forgotten what it means to protect. You have forgotten what it means to sacrifice." With a cry, the shattered one unleashed their magic, a torrent of dark energy that shook the very foundations of the world. The air summoned the power of the dragon tongue, speaking the ancient words that had once bound the dragons to the earth. A great battle raged, light against darkness, the forces of creation against the force of destruction. But the air's strength was not in their magic alone, it was in the bonds they had formed with their companions, with the world, and with the dragons themselves. Together, they stood against the darkness, united in their resolve. At the heart of the battle, the air faced the shattered one final time. The air was thick with magic, and the ground beneath their feet cracked and split. The shattered one raised their hands, preparing to unleash a final, devastating spell that would destroy everything. But the air stepped forward, speaking the final words of the ancient covenant in the dragon tongue. These words were not of destruction, but of healing, of reconciliation. They were the words that could restore the shattered one to their true self, if only they would listen. "You are not lost," the air said, their voice filled with compassion. "You are not beyond redemption. The covenant binds us all not as masters and servants, but as equals. It is not too late to return to the light." For a long moment, the shattered one hesitated, their twisted form flickering with uncertainty. The darkness that had consumed them began to recede, replaced by a glimmer of the person they had once been. But the choice was theirs to make. And in that moment, the shattered one made a decision. With a final, anguished cry, they released the power they had held for so long, and the heart of darkness began to collapse. The battle was over. The shattered one had been redeemed, and the world was safe once more. The air, their companions, and the dragons returned to the valley, where the first rays of dawn illuminated the land. The world was changed, but it was not broken. The covenant had been restored, not just through power, but through understanding. The air had fulfilled their destiny, not by defeating their enemies, but by showing them the way back to the light. And so, the dragons watched over the world once more, silent and eternal, their wisdom a guiding light for all who sought peace. The air, now a legend, stood as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of the ancient covenant would always shine through. After the shattered one's fall, peace seemed to descend upon the land. The once ruined villages began to rebuild, and the people, who had long lived in fear of the darkness, now found hope in the air's example. Yet, despite the victory, the air knew that their journey was far from over. The ancient covenant had been restored, but the forces that sought to upset the balance were still out there, hiding in the far corners of the world. The dragons, though silent, remained vigilant, their eyes ever watchful, and the air, now fully awakened to their power, understood that they were the guardians of this peace. But the real work, they realized, was not in defeating enemies, but in maintaining the delicate balance between light and darkness. In the months that followed, the heir traveled far and wide, learning from the lands they had saved. They spoke with the elders of villages, sharing the wisdom of the dragons, reminding everyone of the importance of harmony between all creatures, human, dragon, and everything in between. The heir's presence was a beacon of the true power of the covenant: unity, compassion, and responsibility. One day, as the heir stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the valley where the last of the dragons had once nested, a great shape appeared in the sky. The dragons, it seemed, had not disappeared entirely. They had retreated into hiding, awaiting the heir's signal. And now, with the balance restored, they were ready to return to the world of humans. The first dragon to descend was the same one who had aided the heir in their greatest trials. Its wings stretched wide, casting a shadow across the land. Its voice boomed through the air. The time has come, heir. The covenant has been restored, but there is much still to do. The world is fragile, the balance is delicate, and the covenant must live on through you, through your descendants. The heir nodded, understanding the weight of the words. This was not just their battle, it was a battle that would continue for generations. The dragons had always been there, watching over the land, protecting it, but now, they would stand side by side with humans, united in their purpose. The heir bowed deeply, acknowledging the ancient dragon's wisdom. Then I will honor the covenant, not just for today, but for all time. I will ensure that the promise we made is kept, and the peace we've won is never lost. As the years passed, the heir's influence spread far beyond the valley. They became a leader, not through force or fear, but through understanding and compassion. The heir established the Order of the Dragon's Covenant, a group of warriors, scholars, and peacekeepers dedicated to preserving the balance. These individuals, bound by the ancient promise, worked together to maintain peace between humans, dragons, and the other creatures of the world. Under the heir's guidance, the covenant was no longer a legend told in whispers, it became a living tradition, passed down to new generations. Children were taught the language of the dragons, learning to understand their wisdom and respect their strength. The people grew closer to the dragons, seeing them not as creatures to be feared, but as protectors and allies. As the heir grew older, they passed on their knowledge to a new generation of leaders, training them to carry the covenant's flame. The heir's work had created a lasting bond between humans and dragons, a bond that would endure for centuries. However, even in times of peace, darkness never truly disappears. Hidden in the corners of the world, there were still those who sought to control the power of the dragons. Some believed that the covenant was an obstacle to be destroyed, while others sought to manipulate its power for their own gain. One such group, known as the Broken Oath, emerged from the shadows. These rogue mages and dark-hearted rulers sought to break the covenant, believing that in doing so, they would unleash the true potential of the dragons, using them as weapons of war and conquest. They believed that if the power of the dragons was unchecked, the world would be theirs to command. The heir, now older and wiser, sensed the shift in the winds. It was no longer just the dragon's duty to protect the world, it was also the heir's. The darkness would rise again, but this time, the heir would not face it alone. They had allies, now true allies, bound not by blood, but by the covenant they had all sworn to uphold. The heir called upon the Order of the Dragon's Covenant. The warriors, scholars, and mages, who had long protected the peace, gathered once more. Alongside them, the dragons returned, their massive forms filling the skies with their presence. Together, they traveled to the heart of the dark forces, to confront the broken oath before they could shatter the covenant and plunge the world into chaos. The Heir led the charge, their voice carrying the power of the dragon tongue, calling upon the ancient magic that had once restored the covenant. But the broken oath was prepared. Their forces, led by a dark sorcerer known as the Wraith of the Covenant, were ready to strike. The battle raged on, the ground shaking beneath the clash of steel and magic. But this time, the Heir knew that victory would not be achieved through force alone. In the heat of the battle, the Heir faced the Wraith of the Covenant. The dark sorcerer was powerful, their magic a twisted version of the ancient dragon tongue, corrupting the very words of the covenant. "You think you can stop me, Heir?" the Wraith sneered. "The covenant is a lie. It is nothing but a chain, holding back true power. With the dragons at my command, I will remake the world in my image." The Heir, standing firm, answered, "The covenant is not a chain, it is the bond that unites us all. It is the promise that the power of the dragons is not to be used for destruction, but for protection. You may seek to break it, but you will never break the bond of trust that it represents." With that, the Heir raised their hands, invoking the true power of the covenant. The ancient words of the dragon tongue filled the air, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. The dragons, answering the call, descended upon the battlefield, their fiery breath and powerful wings pushing back the darkness. The Wraith, unable to withstand the power of the covenant in its purest form, fell to their knees. The dark magic they had wielded was undone, and with a final cry, the broken oath was vanquished. The Heir stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, their heart heavy but hopeful. The darkness had been repelled once more, but they knew that the covenant was not something that could be taken for granted. It was a living force, one that required constant vigilance and care. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the land, the Heir knew that their legacy was not one of battles won, but of peace sustained. The dragons had returned to the skies, and the people of the world had learned to live in harmony with them. And as long as the Heir's bloodline lived, the covenant would endure forever, binding the people, the dragons, and the land together in peace. The promise had been kept, and the world was a better place for it. As the years passed, the Heir's teachings and the bonds forged between dragons and humans were solidified. In the quiet moments, the Heir would often find themselves sitting by the ancient dragon stones, petrified remains of dragons long past, but still revered as symbols of the covenant. It was here that the Heir would reflect, seeking guidance from the spirits of the ancient dragons who had first sworn the covenant so many centuries ago. One evening, as the Heir meditated beneath the setting sun, the great dragon that had once guided them appeared again in the sky. Its massive wings beat softly against the wind, and its voice, deep and wise, resonated within the Heir's heart. "Your path has not been easy, Heir, but your dedication has ensured that the covenant endures. You have given this world a chance for true peace. Now, the time has come for you to pass on your knowledge, for the future must be shaped by those who walk in your footsteps." The Heir understood the meaning of the words. They had spent their life guarding the covenant, but there would come a time when they too must step aside and allow the next generation to carry the torch. It was a difficult realization, but one that filled them with both pride and humility. "Will the world remain safe, Master?" the Heir asked, their voice full of concern. "Will the darkness ever truly leave us?" The dragon's eyes glimmered with ancient wisdom. "The darkness will always be there, lurking in the corners of existence. But as long as the bond between humans, dragons, and all creatures of the world remains strong, it will never consume you." You have shown the world the strength of unity. Now, it is time to ensure that the covenant is passed on and that the lessons of the past are never forgotten. The heir nodded, feeling a deep sense of purpose. Their work was not yet done, but it was time to entrust the covenant to a new generation, their children, the children of their allies, and those who had sworn to protect the future. In the heart of the dragon's lair, a great gathering took place. The heirs of the heir, chosen for their wisdom and courage, stood before the ancient dragon guardians, ready to take their place as the new stewards of the covenant. The heir, now much older, stood at the forefront of this ceremony, their hearts swelling with pride and hope for the future. You are the ones who will carry this burden now, the heir said, their voice steady but filled with emotion. The world will look to you, just as it once looked to me. You will be the voice of the dragons, the protectors of peace. Remember always that the covenant is not just an oath, it is a living promise to uphold the balance of this world. The young ones who stood before them nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of the responsibility placed upon their shoulders. Each of them had been chosen for their unique qualities: bravery, wisdom, and kindness. The heir had seen in them the potential to uphold the ideals of the covenant, and they knew that they would carry it into the future with honor. With a final, powerful speech, the heir handed over the sacred artifact of the covenant, a crystal imbued with the magic of the dragons. It glowed with a soft light, a symbol of the bond between all living creatures. May the covenant always guide you, the heir whispered, stepping back to allow the new generation to step forward. Years passed in peace, but the heir's wisdom was tested one last time. From the depths of the forgotten lands, a new threat emerged, unlike any they had faced before. A sorcerer, obsessed with the power of the ancient covenant, sought to tear it asunder. Believing that by doing so, they could seize control of the dragon's magic for their own twisted purposes. The world once again trembled on the edge of war, and it was up to the new generation of covenant keepers to rise to the challenge. They sought the counsel of the heir, who had now become an elder, their once fiery spirit tempered by the years, but still burning with the strength of the covenant. We must stop them, the heir said, their voice gravely serious. The darkness may never truly be gone, but it is our duty to ensure that it does not destroy the balance we have fought so hard to create. The young heroes, now leaders in their own right, nodded in agreement. Together, they gathered the forces of the dragons, the mages, and the people of the land. The final battle against the sorcerer would be their greatest challenge. The dragons, led by the heir's trusted companions, soared high above, their roars shaking the very air as they prepared to face the forces of darkness. The battle raged for days, the skies filled with the clash of magic and steel. The sorcerer's dark forces were relentless, but the united front of the dragons and the covenant keepers stood firm. The heir, though no longer at the forefront of battle, watched from the sidelines, offering guidance and wisdom to the next generation. It was during the final confrontation that the true power of the covenant was revealed. The heir, sensing the final moment approaching, called upon the ancient language of the dragons once more. The power of the covenant flowed through them, a tidal wave of magic that surged towards the sorcerer. With a final, desperate cry, the sorcerer attempted to shatter the covenant once and for all. But the bond, forged over centuries, proved stronger than any force of darkness. The sorcerer was defeated, and the world was saved once more. The heir, their strength spent, smiled quietly, knowing that the world was in good hands. The battle had been won, and peace would reign at least for a time. But they understood now, more than ever, that the covenant was not a one-time victory. It was a never-ending journey, one that would continue as long as there were those who believed in the strength of unity and the power of the dragons. As the sun rose over the peaceful lands, the heir stood on the edge of the cliff once more, watching as the dragons took to the skies. The world had been forever changed, but the covenant remained, as strong as ever. The heir's legacy would live on through the generations, as would the promise of the dragons and the balance they had sworn to protect. The heir, knowing their time was done, turned to leave the cliff, their heart light. The dragons would continue to soar, the covenant would continue to endure, and the world would know peace. For now, and for all time. With the defeat of the sorcerer and the securing of the covenant, peace began to settle over the land. The next generation of guardians, those who had once been students of the heir, took their place as the new keepers of the dragon's magic. They traveled to every corner of the world, spreading the teachings of the covenant and ensuring that the alliance between dragons and humans remained strong. The heir, now an elder figure, passed their days teaching young warriors and sages, imparting the wisdom of the dragons. Though their physical strength had waned, their voice carried the weight of centuries of knowledge. They remained a living connection to the ancient dragons, their guidance sought by those who would protect the future. The new guardians forged deeper relationships with the dragons. Together, they built a network of sanctuaries where dragons could rest and be safe from the dangers of the world. Human and dragon worked side by side to restore lands that had been marred by conflict, using the wisdom of the covenant to heal the wounds of the earth itself. As the years turned into decades, a new threat loomed this time. It came not from an external enemy, but from within. A faction of humans, believing that the power of the dragons was too great to be left in the hands of a few, began to grow restless. They called themselves the Purifiers, and they believed that the covenant between humans and dragons was unnatural. They sought to break the bond, believing that it was the only way to truly secure peace. The Purifiers began to spread their influence, sowing distrust and fear among the people. Their rhetoric was powerful, and soon, whispers of rebellion reached even the ears of the guardians. The heir, sensing the rising threat, knew that it was time for the final trial, the ultimate test of the covenant's strength. "You have learned much," the heir spoke to the guardians one fateful evening. "But you must now prove that you are worthy of the covenant's legacy. The future of this world rests in your hands, and you must stand against those who would tear it asunder." The guardians gathered, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had been prepared for this moment since their earliest days, but now, the true test had arrived. The conflict between the guardians and the Purifiers was inevitable. Both sides fought for what they believed was right, but the battle was not one of mere physical strength, it was a clash of ideologies. The Purifiers, with their fervent beliefs, were determined to erase the dragons from the world. Convinced that their removal would lead to a purer, more peaceful existence. The guardians, however, understood that the dragons were an essential part of the world's balance. And their power was a force of nature that could not be ignored. The battlefield was vast, spanning the once untouched lands and sacred grounds of the covenant. The dragons, fierce and majestic, fought alongside their human companions, their fire lighting up the sky as they clashed with the Purifiers' forces. It was a brutal battle, one that tested the very soul of the covenant. At the height of the conflict, the heir, though now frail with age, stood tall, their voice ringing through the air. "The covenant is not a chain, it is a bond of choice and respect. It is not a force that enslaves, but one that unites. The dragons do not seek to rule you, but to walk beside you, in harmony. You cannot undo the past without destroying the future." Their words reverberated through the hearts of the guardians and the dragons alike, urging them to stand firm against the Purifiers' madness. The battle raged on, but the tide began to turn as the guardians rallied to their cause, the strength of the covenant shining through. When the final clash ended, the Purifiers were defeated, but not without great cost. The battle had taken its toll, and many lives were lost on both sides. The world, though victorious, was left scarred by the wounds of war. But the covenant had endured, and the bond between dragons and humans remained intact. In the aftermath, the heir, having guided the final generation, withdrew from public life, content in the knowledge that the covenant would continue. The young guardians, now the leaders of their people, ensured that the teachings of the covenant were passed down to future generations. Not through the sword, but through wisdom and compassion. The dragons, once again, took to the skies, their wings casting long shadows over the land. The heir, standing at the threshold of their final chapter, gazed upon the world they had saved. The dragons, the guardians, and the people would continue to walk together, side by side, for as long as the covenant stood. And as the heir's final days came to a close, they knew in their heart that the legacy of the dragons would live on. The words of the covenant would echo across the ages, guiding the world toward a future of unity, peace, and understanding. The years passed, and the world healed. The dragons, no longer a source of fear or wonder, became symbols of wisdom, strength, and unity. The covenant lived on, not as a relic of the past, but as a living testament to the enduring power of collaboration and mutual respect. And so, the story of the heir and the ancient covenant became legend. It was passed down through songs, tales, and teachings, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, unity could light the way. The covenant between dragons and humans remained a bond unbroken, forever etched in the history of the world. The dragons, with their ancient wisdom, continued to soar above the lands, guardians of the balance that held the world together. And the heir's legacy, now a distant memory, lived on in the hearts of those who remembered the covenant. And in the hearts of those who would, one day, carry the torch forward. For the covenant was not just a pact, it was a promise. A promise that would never fade. Years turned to centuries, and the world that the heir had fought for flourished. The covenant between dragons and humans remained unbroken, carried forward by those who believed in its power. Yet, as the world grew older and more prosperous, a new generation emerged that had never known the fear and conflict that had once torn the land apart. To them, the dragons were not symbols of ancient power but merely creatures of myth. In the heart of the Old Kingdom, where the last remnants of the Covenant's first protectors lay, a young scholar named Elyon was studying ancient texts in the great library of the Dragonstone. These texts spoke of the Covenant, of dragons who once soared through the skies in fiery flight, and of the heir who had ensured that peace would reign. Elyon, with eyes filled with curiosity, had always been fascinated by the old legends. But as he delved deeper into the forgotten tomes, something strange began to stir within him. He found mentions of a prophecy, buried in the folds of the texts, an ancient prediction that spoke of a time when the bond between dragons and humans would weaken, and a new heir would rise to restore the harmony that had once existed. The prophecy was cryptic, but Elyon could not ignore the growing feeling that it was meant for him. He had always felt a strange connection to the dragons, an unexplainable pull that called to him from the distant past. And so, he began to investigate further, seeking out forgotten places and ancient dragons who still lingered in the hidden corners of the world. Elyon's quest took him to the peaks of the Misty Mountains, where the last of the dragon clans were said to reside. For days, he climbed the treacherous cliffs, guided only by the whispers of the wind and the stars above. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the summit, a vast, open space where the last of the dragons were said to sleep. It was here, in the heart of the ancient dragon's domain, that Elyon encountered a creature unlike any he had ever seen. It was a dragon of silver scales, its eyes gleaming like molten silver. The air shimmered with the power of its presence, and Elyon knew in that moment that he had found something truly ancient. The dragon's voice, deep and resonant, echoed in his mind. "You are the one who has come to seek the truth. I have waited for you, Elyon, for I have seen the signs." The covenant is not merely a bond between dragons and humans. It is a force that sustains the very fabric of the world. Without it, all will fall into chaos. Elyon fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the power of the dragon's words. "But why me? I am no heir, no chosen one. I am only a scholar." The dragon's gaze softened. "You are the heir to the forgotten legacy. The bond you seek is not only the one forged between us, but the one that binds your heart to the very soul of the world. You, Elyon, are the one destined to restore what was lost." With those words, Elyon's mind was filled with visions of the past, the great battles, the alliance between humans and dragons, the oath that had been sworn. He saw the heir, the one who had once stood where he now stood, the one who had protected the covenant. "You must take up the mantle," the dragon continued. "The covenant is fraying at the edges, and darkness once again stirs. But it is not too late. You have the power to restore the balance. You must awaken the draconic voice." The draconic voice was the ancient language that had once allowed the first heirs to communicate with the dragons directly, to wield the power of the covenant. Over time, the language had faded from the world, lost to the sands of time. Only those with the purest of hearts and the strongest of wills could awaken it once more. Elyon, with the guidance of the silver dragon, began to learn the language. Each word was like a note of music, resonating deep within his soul. As he spoke the ancient phrases, the world around him seemed to shift. The air grew thick with magic, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. He felt the power of the dragons coursing through him, the ancient bond reawakening. The voice of the dragon became his own, and with it, the strength of the covenant flowed through him. But Elyon knew that awakening the draconic voice was only the beginning. The true test lay ahead. He had to convince the world to once again believe in the power of the covenant. The dragons would not return to their old ways easily, and the people who had forgotten the lessons of the past would be difficult to persuade. He returned to the kingdom, where whispers of his journey had already begun to spread. The people were skeptical, dismissing his claims as fantasy. The dragons were mere myths to them, relics of a bygone age. But Elyon did not give up. He traveled across the land, seeking out the old allies of the covenant, those who still remembered the days of peace and prosperity. Elyon's journey took him far and wide, to the corners of the world where dragons still roamed in secret. He found the mages who had once worked alongside the guardians, the warriors who had fought in the great battles, and the scholars who had studied the ways of the covenant. One by one, they came to his side, drawn by the promise of the draconic voice. Together, they built a new council, a fellowship of those who believed in the old ways. They began to train new generations of guardians, those who would stand alongside the dragons and protect the covenant from the forces that threatened to tear it apart. The dragons, now awakened from their long slumber, took their place at the head of this new alliance. They soared through the skies once more, their roars echoing through the land. And Elyon, now the heir to the legacy of the dragon tongue, stood at the forefront of this new age, a symbol of the eternal bond between dragons and humans. As Elyon led the new generation of guardians, he saw the promise of the prophecy fulfilled. The covenant, once nearly forgotten, had been restored. The dragons and humans, united once more, rebuilt the world together. The magic of the covenant flowed freely again, healing the wounds of the past and ushering in a new era of peace. But Elyon knew that the work was never truly done. The covenant was a living force, one that required constant care and vigilance. And as long as there were those who remembered the power of unity, the world would remain safe. The draconic voice continued to echo in the hearts of those who carried the legacy of the covenant. And the world, forever changed by the wisdom and strength of the dragons, flourished in the light of the eternal bond. Elion's work was far from over. Though the covenant had been restored, the forces that sought to sever the bond between dragons and humans still lurked in the shadows. They were not a visible enemy, but a quiet dissonance that whispered in the hearts of those who felt uncomfortable with the dragon's return. Elion had seen this before: whispers of fear and distrust, the notion that the power of the covenant was too great to be left in the hands of mere mortals. It was not the dragons themselves that scared people, but the idea that such ancient power could tip the balance of the world. He had to act quickly. He summoned the Council of Guardians and ancient allies to prepare for the next phase of their plan: the renewal of the great ritual of peace. The very ceremony that had forged the original covenant between dragons and humans. It was a reminder to the world that the dragons were protectors, not conquerors. A reassurance that the covenant was not a weapon, but a bond of mutual trust. The ceremony would take place in the ancient heart of the Dragonstone, where the original covenant had been sealed. It was here that the first heir had stood, where the dragons had once gathered, and where the blood of the first guardians had been spilled to forge the pact. The ritual was a symbolic one, but it held immense power. As Elion stood at the altar, surrounded by dragons, guardians, and allies, he called upon the draconic voice once more. The sky above the Dragonstone opened up, and a great roar echoed through the land. The dragons, flying in formation, encircled the altar, their wings casting shadows over the land. The ceremony was long, filled with ancient incantations and songs passed down through generations. Elion felt the weight of the covenant settle upon his shoulders, a reminder of the responsibility he bore. But as the final words of the ritual echoed through the air, a wave of light washed over the land, reaffirming the bond. The great ritual of peace was complete, and the world held its breath. With the covenant reaffirmed, the dragons and humans entered a new era of cooperation. It was not an easy journey, but it was one built on mutual respect and understanding. Elion, now known as the Keeper of the Draconic Voice, traveled the world with the dragons, ensuring that the wisdom of the covenant was passed down to every corner of the earth. The dragons, once hidden away in the distant mountains, now walked among the people, their presence a sign of strength and guidance. They served not as rulers, but as teachers, their ancient knowledge helping to guide humanity toward a future of peace and prosperity. In time, Elion began to see the fruit of his labor. The lands once torn apart by war and fear began to heal. Cities grew, forests flourished, and the waters ran clear once more. The people, once divided, now worked together alongside the dragons, united by a common cause. But even as peace reigned, Elion could not ignore the whispers of an approaching storm. Though the dragons had helped bring peace to the world, there were still forces at work that sought to disrupt the balance. These were not simple mortals, but beings of darkness, ancient creatures who had lived beneath the earth, beyond the reach of the covenant. For centuries, they had been silent, waiting for the moment when the world would grow complacent, when the bond between dragons and humans would weaken. And now, with the covenant stronger than ever, they saw an opportunity to strike. Elion, though weary from his long journey, could feel the shift in the air. The winds were no longer calm, and the dragon's roars grew more frequent. Something was coming, a darkness that even the power of the draconic voice could not easily dispel. He called upon the council once more, urging them to prepare for what was to come. We have restored the covenant, but we must remain vigilant. There are those who wish to break the bond and return the world to chaos. We must stand ready. The guardians and dragons rallied together, reforging the ancient defenses that had once protected the world from the forces of darkness. Alien knew that this new enemy would not be defeated through battle alone. It would require something more, a unity beyond the physical, a unity of the soul. The day came when the shadows rose, a dark army of twisted creatures that poured forth from the depths of the earth. They were led by an ancient being, one who had once been a dragon, but had fallen into madness and darkness. This dark dragon, known as Vorthar, had once been part of the covenant but had been corrupted by greed and power. Vorthar sought to break the bond between dragons and humans, to rule the world in his own image. He believed that only through domination could peace be achieved, that the covenant was weak and fragile, and that the dragons and humans were too dependent on one another. The battle between the forces of light and darkness was fierce. The dragons fought valiantly, their flames lighting the sky. Alien stood at the forefront, his voice resonating with the draconic voice as he called upon the magic of the covenant. The world trembled as the two sides clashed, and for a moment, it seemed that the darkness would overrun them. But Alien had learned that the strength of the covenant was not in power, but in unity. He called upon the bonds of friendship and trust that had been forged between the dragons and humans. Slowly, the forces of darkness began to falter, their power weakening as the light of the covenant shone brighter. Vorthar, realizing the futility of his struggle, let out a final roar of fury before he was banished back into the depths of the earth from whence he came. The darkness receded, and the world was saved once more. The battle had been won, but Alien knew that the fight was never truly over. The covenant was a living thing, one that required constant care and vigilance. Yet, he felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The world was not perfect, but it was whole. And as long as the covenant stood, there would always be hope. Alien passed the mantle of Keeper of the Draconic Voice to a new generation. The dragons, their ancient wisdom and power, continued to guide the world, and the bond between humans and dragons remained strong. The covenant had endured, and with it, the promise of a future where peace reigned. And so, the legacy of the dragon tongue, the ancient covenant, and the heir who had restored it, lived on. The story of Alien, the Keeper of the Draconic Voice, became a legended tale passed down through generations as a reminder that unity, trust, and understanding were the true sources of strength. For as long as the covenant endured, the world would be protected. The ancient covenant, sealed long ago, lived on in the hearts of those who remembered. It was no longer just a pact between dragons and humans, but a living symbol of the enduring power of unity and understanding. Alien's story became a beacon, a light that guided those who came after him. And in the whispers of the wind, the rustling of the leaves, and the songs of the dragons, the covenant was always an eternal promise that would never fade. In the years following the defeat of Vorthar, a sense of calm began to settle over the world. Alien's legacy grew stronger with each passing year, his teachings of peace, unity, and understanding spreading throughout the lands. But, as with all things, peace is fragile, and the forces of darkness are not always easily defeated. Beneath the surface, there were whispers and unsettling silence that threatened to undo all the work they had fought so hard for. Alien could feel it in the winds, in the way the dragons flew with unease, their sharp eyes watching the horizon. The ancient bond, though renewed, was still young, and the forces that sought to challenge it were patient. Even after the fall of Vorthar, there were still remnants of the Dark One's followers, lingering in the shadows, quietly plotting their next move. But Alien did not face this threat alone. He gathered the new generation of guardians, those who had been trained in the ways of the Draconic Voice. The protectors who had pledged to uphold the covenant. Among them was Kellen, a young warrior whose connection to the dragons was unlike anything Alien had ever seen. She was the first of the new guardians, a beacon of hope and strength. Kellen had been chosen by the dragons themselves, a mark of her destiny. Her bloodline carried a deep connection to the ancient magic, and she had inherited the ability to speak the dragon tongue as fluently as any dragon. Elyon saw in her the future of the Covenant, a bridge between the old ways and the new, a leader who would carry the mantle when the time came. Together, they traveled across the land, strengthening the bonds between humans and dragons. They sought out forgotten temples and hidden ruins where the ancient teachings of the Covenant had been inscribed in forgotten languages. Elyon knew that the more they understood the past, the stronger they would be in defending the future. As time passed, Elyon grew older. His once youthful face had become weathered, marked by the battles fought, the long years of peace he had worked to maintain, and the wisdom he had gained. The burden of leadership was heavy, but Elyon had never wavered in his devotion to the Covenant. Yet, in his heart, a nagging feeling had begun to grow, a sense that a great test was coming, one that would challenge everything they had fought for. The signs were subtle at first: strange storms in the north, dragons gathering in the ancient skies, and an unsettling dream that Elyon had known that had come to him in a language older than time itself. The dream spoke of the end of the Covenant, of a time when the bond between dragons and humans would be broken, and the world would be plunged into darkness. Elyon confided in Kellen, sharing his fears. The young guardian listened carefully, her eyes filled with understanding. "We have always known that the Covenant would face trials," she said. "But we also know that we can endure them. We have the strength of our ancestors behind us." Despite her confidence, Elyon knew that this was different. This was not merely a battle between light and dark, it was a test of the very foundation of their world. He could feel the shift in the balance of power, as if something ancient was waking beneath the surface. One day, Elyon received a messenger from the farthest reaches of the kingdom. The message was simple, but chilling: "The Fallen One has risen." The Fallen One, as the legends spoke, was a being older than time itself. It was a force of chaos, an entity that had existed long before the Covenant had been forged. When the world was young, the Fallen One had been imprisoned by the first dragons and guardians in the deepest reaches of the earth. It was said that when the Covenant was broken, the Fallen One would return, and with it would come the end of the dragon's reign and the beginning of an age of darkness. Elyon knew that this was the moment he had feared. The very balance of the world was in jeopardy. The Fallen One's return meant that everything they had fought for, everything the dragons and humans had built together, was at risk of being destroyed. He gathered the guardians and dragons in secret, preparing for what would surely be a battle unlike any they had ever faced. The Fallen One was not a creature to be defeated by steel or fire, it was a force of nature, a primal power that could tear apart the fabric of reality itself. Elyon knew the only way to stop it was to reach deep into the magic of the Covenant, to unite the dragons and humans like never before. They would need to tap into the very core of the draconic voice, awakening powers that had long been dormant. The battle against the Fallen One took place in the heart of the world, at the ancient site of the First Covenant. The dragons and humans stood side by side, united against the primal force that sought to tear their world apart. The ground trembled as the Fallen One rose from the depths, its form an ever-shifting mass of darkness and destruction. Its voice was a chorus of anguish, echoing the pain of the world itself. "You dare defy me?" it boomed. "The Covenant was a lie, a chain that bound you to the dragons. I will break it. I will undo everything you have built." Elyon, standing at the forefront, called upon the power of the draconic voice. He could feel the magic within him, pulsing with the strength of the Covenant. He knew that the key to defeating the Fallen One was not in overpowering it but in understanding it. The Fallen One was born of the same primal forces that had shaped the dragons, the guardians, and the very world itself. It was the embodiment of chaos, and chaos could only be calmed by unity. With Kellen by his side, Alien stepped forward, speaking the ancient words of the draconic tongue. The earth shook, and the sky darkened as the magic of the covenant flared to life. The dragons and humans joined together in a final, united chant, calling upon the forces of nature, of life and death, to restore balance. The fallen one screamed in rage, but its form began to fracture. The power of the covenant, stronger than ever before, wrapped around the darkness, binding it once again. Slowly, the shadows receded, the fallen one's power diminished, until it was but a whisper in the wind. The world was saved, but the cost had been great. Alien, though victorious, knew that his time was drawing to a close. The battle had taken its toll on him, and the power of the draconic voice had nearly drained him. But he was not afraid. He had lived to see the covenant renewed, to witness the strength of the dragons and humans united as one. As he passed on the mantle of Keeper of the Draconic Voice to Kellen, Alien knew that the world was in good hands. The covenant would endure, as would the legacy of those who had fought to protect it. The dragons, the humans, and the land itself would carry on, forever bound by the ancient bond that had shaped their destiny. And in the skies above, the dragons flew, their wings beating in rhythm with the heartbeat of the world, a symbol of the everlasting covenant. A reminder that the battle for peace was never truly over. Kellen stood at the peak of Dragonstone, looking out across the world. The winds carried the whispers of the dragons, and she could feel the weight of her new responsibility. The covenant was secure, but she knew there would always be challenges ahead. But she was not alone. She had the strength of her ancestors, the wisdom of Alien, and the trust of the dragons. And above all, she had the promise of the covenant, a promise that the world would always be protected, as long as the dragons and humans stood together. The heir of the draconic voice had stepped into the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as long as the covenant endured, so too would the hope for a brighter tomorrow. That's the end of today's story. See you.